Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to be talking about the Aplacifican Revolt, and this video is going to be probably a 3 to 4 part video, maybe, because there is a lot to talk about. And I also would try to make it more fun by splitting up as much time I have to tell you guys and explain, like, what was this about, who was involved, what started it, how it ended, or the ending results and stuff like that. So we will go ahead and start off with the first topic: who were involved. Okay, guys. So before we're going to start off with why the Aplacifican nations at first started a revolt against the foreign imperial nations. And for those who don't know, I'm going to go ahead and pull up a map and show you. So the four nations that were at war with the imperial powers were Egypt, the Bulgarian Republic, Nigeria, and Angola. And the imperial powers, which are represented by the colonies, which I will demonstrate. These dark green colonies up here belong to Gridley. These two light green colonies belong to Kandahar. These blue colonies right here belong to Bulgaria. And these two colonies belong to Basaja. Now, the nation up here of Morocco is an independent nation, but is allies with the Bulgarians. And a long time ago, which I'm going to pull out that map, a long time ago, before they were once nations, they used to be tribes of four different, right here. There were tribes that were living in different climates, which will go back all the way to 2022. As you can see, this is what the original map used to look like. And who founded this continent was Arthur Pendergast. And Arthur Pendergast called this continent Aplacifica. And he was a Basajan admiral that was sent by the king to find territory to claim for their empire, since Basaja and the leader of the time, King Harold Sada, the son of King Sada, wanted to build an empire. So they first made alliances with other nations, but they wanted to actually own land as a form of permanent occupation. So they found Aplacifica, which this was not called Aplacifica yet, but when Arthur Pendergast found it, it was called Aplacifica. Now, the tribes that lived on these lands were the desert, the plains, the jungle, and the delta. These four tribes lived together, but they have not always lived together peacefully. Sometimes they would be at war with the Delta tribe, and here's the reason why. The Delta tribe is responsible for many theft. Like, they would steal from other tribes, they would stiff them up on trade deals, and also they would kill anyone that tries to trade with them on their own territory. So that's what causes these three tribes up here to go to war with the Delta. And their goal was to officially annihilate or remove the Delta tribe from existence, because they had seen them as a pest, and they didn't like a tribe that has only been stealing from them for many years. So they decided to go. All three tribes decided to go to war with the one tribe, which was the Delta. And when the admiral found this land and landed in the Delta region, the Delta tribe begged with the foreigners to help them win their war. And if they did win their war, they would be granted as many supplies as they needed. They would also be granted as many land as they needed, and they could own whatever they want, which Arthur Pendergast agreed and liked the idea. So he would later talk to King Harold and say, hey, there's a tribesman here that need our help, and they're at war with the 3 other tribes, and they need our help to help defeat these tribes. And if we defeat them and help this tribe, he says that we can have as many territory and everything that we needed. So King Harold agreed and began to declare war on the 3 other tribes. And at first, Basaja was fighting on their own, and they were losing because the tribes had guerrilla warfare to their advantage and were mostly equipped with silent weapons such as bows and arrows, spears, axes, tomahawks, knives, anything you can think of, they have it. And those tools had a greater advantage because they were quiet, they were not loud, and they can easily ambush their enemies and attack them from behind. But they would later make alliance with Bulgaria, and Bulgaria wanted in on this action because they too wanted to build some sort of industrial colonizing empire too. So Basaja and Bulgaria made an agreement, and they both decided to work together to help the Delta tribe win the war. And when they won the war, they would later have territory, which we will see here in a moment. So this is what the first original Aplacifican map was. All this brown territory was left to the natives, and as you can see here, originally there were the 2 Bulgarian colonies, the 2 Botswana colonies, and the nation of Ketchup. Now, Ketchup wasn't originally a nation. It was a nation from a different territory. It was from Tenyo, and Ketchup originally was a Tenyoan nation called Caberlan. But the Caberlans got tired of living in the same area they were living in Tenyo, and decided to basically mass migrate their whole population to the continent of Aplacifica and have occupied the territory in the northeastern region, calling it Ketchup. And they would rename their nation Ketchup instead of Caberlan. And this was also during the time where the Caberlans and the Basajans were rivals for several years. One war, Caberlans lost, and they were forced to be a colony to Basaja. So wherever Basaja had its territory, the Caberlans still were underneath their control, and they decided to mass evacuate because they got tired of the place they were living in, and so forth. So that's why their Ketchup is here, and that's the backstory of Ketchup. Now, several months later would come Kandahar, because Kandahar wanted some territory, and that's where the first Kandaharan colony was. And then several years later, after Kandahar had his own territory, came the Barako territory, which these were tribesmen that would trade with Bulgaria for weapons and ammunition to protect their people, since their old weapons were not useful anymore, and they knew that if they were to be at war with other foreigner nations with weapons of mass destruction or whatever, they wouldn't have anything to defend themselves. So that's where this territory comes in. And as time went by, there was also a couple of territorial disagreements, because you see, Basaja and Bulgaria originally made a deal when they occupied the territories that they would have the same amount of territory, so that neither one of them could overpower or have more land than the other and cause tensions. So that's why there's only 2 colonies for both Basaja and Bulgaria than the 2 colonies for Kandahar. But later, this would be brought up, and the International Committee, which would be hosted by Kandahar, because Kandahar is in charge of the MITS, or AMITS, which stands for Army Men International Trading System, and they are in charge of everything that has happened with global trade, and they're the most richest economy and country of all time. So when they have issues about having one colony in Aplacifica, they had a meeting with Basaj and Bulgaria saying, hey, you have 2 colonies, I have 1, and that's not fair. How about we make a equal amount deal where I have 2 colonies, Bulgaria has 2 colonies, and Basaj has 2 colonies, and that way we won't have tensions. Because you see, I don't like going to war with you 2 guys, and I'm a neutral guy, and I don't like to be forced to go to war over something that is really unfair. So let's make a peaceful agreement and see where it goes, how it goes, which luckily worked, and they have settled the territorial agreement and have allowed Kandahar to own 2 colonies, which would be shown here. But later than that, the new nation during the years of 2023 would be Gridley. Now, Gridley at first was a democratic nation, but after Gridley made an alliance deal with Bamaya for military protection and protecting them from other threats, they began to change their nation from once a democratic nation to a kingdom or a monarchy. So the leader of Gridley, Beto Kovalenko, changed his role as president to king quickly, and they wanted territory as well. So they saw Aplacifica wanted the territory, and they hooked up a meeting with Kandahar, Basaja, and Bulgaria, and Basaja, and Kandahar were okay with Gridley owning territory, so they decided where to place the territories. And they decided to go with the 2 territories, one south of Ketchup and one to the east of that territory, one to the west of that territory, and these 2 will be for Gridley, which are the colonies of Abyssinia, which in real life was based on Abyssinia during World War II, and Abyssinia at the time was originally Ethiopia. So basically, this is green Ethiopia, and then we have Gibeah, which is this colony here. So that's the history of where the colonization began. And like I said, as time went by, these native nations would later become independent nations that have no foreign power overpowering them or running by them, because when Egypt was originally founded by the tribe, they're like, this guy's a foreigner, but he's independent, even though he's colonized, and he's running his own nation. So how about we break from our traditions of being tribes and move on to being like Egypt, being an independent nation? And that's where the independent nations would later rise, because during the Egyptian Revolution, these 2 nations, Algeria and the Bagon Republic, would later be discovered, and Morocco was once a territory, now becomes an independent nation. And these 2 would help Ketchup try to fight the Basajans during their revolution, which would fail because Egypt and its allies were not enough to defeat Basaja and its allies, and they lost the war and resulted with them having to pay war reparations and everything. So that's what, and that also would linger the more anger for not only Egypt was happy that they got their independence, but the Bagoans and the Bajirians still would have anger towards the foreign nations, and there's a reason why. Because, like I said, they were once tribes, and when these foreigners started to occupy some of their territory, and if you take a look from the different, if you take a look from the before, and as the years went by, so as years went by, territories, well, first of all, I got this mixed up. Hold on. So as time went by, these nations would begin to occupy territory and leave little left, which causes problems and tensions, which they had since the very beginning. But they would not ease these tensions yet because they still had time to prepare themselves, recuperate, pay their dues, and then wait to strike again. And as more time flew by, that's when the two new nations of just a second. Well, actually, the new nation of Angola came around. They figured that they would have a chance to defeat the foreign imperial allies, and Kegypt was in on this because Kegypt wanted to wanted to help these nations free their brothers and free their ancestors from these imperial nations' power, which would be the start of tension between the imperial powers and the Aplacifican nations. And Basaja had these suspicions ever since the last of the Egyptian Revolution, which is why we will get into in the next video, which would be how and which would be how this whole war started, and that will be next time. So thank you guys for at least watching the first part, and I will see you guys next time.